We begin with a White House struggling to defend a speech that was widely criticized for factual errors and, in several cases, undercut by documents the administration itself released alongside it. Take just two supposed fact checks released by the White House last night. After criticism that China's so-called compromise of U.S. election data was actually from publicly available databases, the White House responded by pointing out that the Biden White House sanctioned China for obtaining similar information on British voters. Notice, they didn't dispute the information was publicly available or that China's actions were previously reported. Then, in response to the criticism that Trump's speech showed, quote, no evidence foreign actors were able to change the outcome of votes, the White House said, quote, this is a deliberate attempt to change the subject. In his remarks, President Trump did not make a claim about past elections. He exposed dangerous, ongoing vulnerabilities. Again, that is not a rebuttal. And a bit bizarre given years of Trump's own claims that the 2020 election, particularly in Georgia, was stolen from him. But Trump's address represents the latest in a long pressure campaign to influence state elections, demanding states turn over their voter rolls, exploring whether ICE agents could be sent to polling locations, firing the remaining members of the Election Assistance Commission, an independent bipartisan commission that supports states in administering their elections, seeking the names of Fulton County, Georgia election workers, and dispatching then Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard to Fulton County, Georgia. For President Trump, Georgia has remained a political fixation for nearly 6 years. And as Senator Jon Ossoff argues, that doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon.
The same man whose grievances stirred up that violent mob that sacked the Capitol still cannot let go of his shame and humiliation at having been dealt that defeat by voters here in Georgia and across the country. And so at a moment when his war spirals out of control and prices for American families climb higher and higher, instead of focusing on the nation's needs, as always, he nurses his grievances. As always, he forces the rest of us to help him process his shame. As always, he centers his own fear of the accountability that he will face when we win decisively this fall. That's what we saw last night.
Joining us now, Stacey Abrams, founder of the voting rights advocacy group, I will get it together, Fair Fight, and former Georgia gubernatorial candidate. Ms. Abrams, it is always good to see you. Thank you for coming to the weekend. We have some new news today from Dasha Burns over at Politico with the headline, Pulte got really scared inside the White House debate over Trump's election speech. And it says here, Acting Director of National Intelligence Bill Pulte pushed to reveal the names of intelligence officials accused of concealing election interference from Trump, according to two officials granted anonymity to discuss private conversations. Pulte, who flew to New York with Trump on Friday, did not respond to a request for comment, but the two officials said he backed down. Quote, Pulte got really scared by the whole thing and pulled back, said one of the two senior officials. Quote, he got POTUS all spun up and then was incredibly scared when he realized people could die with his reckless behavior. This is just, just advancing the conversation about the president's speech on Thursday. But your reaction to that, but also your reaction to what you heard on Thursday.
Jonathan, I think it's so important that we think of all of this as a piece. The goal that they have is to fracture our attention and to make us see each of these behaviors as separate insults and separate transgressions. They're all the same thing. Bill Pulte, who is he sold homes, became the head of the Federal Housing Authority and is now the Director of National Intelligence, despite having apparently neither national awareness nor the intelligence to do the job. And in that role, he was willing to weaponize voting conspiracies and put at risk American lives. That is part of what authoritarianism does. It uses the weapons of democratic institutions to undermine democracy. And at the core of that, the core of democracy is our ability to cast a ballot and determine the direction of government. And so what we are watching happen, what Bill Pulte had to be pulled back from, was someone who was handed a weapon he didn't know how to use to pursue an agenda he doesn't understand, other than the goal of manipulating an outcome his party is desperate to achieve. And we have to remember that all of this, from the voting right infractions to the weaponization of DNI, it's all about how does this party hold on to power when they are losing at the gas pump, they're losing in the homes, and they are losing the American trust.
Leader Abrams, you mentioned the DNI, but there's also the difference between now and 2020 is that Donald Trump also has an attorney general very soon, I assume, who will do whatever he wants when it comes to elections. He has an FBI director who seems to be okay with taking his orders and lead from the president. You have a DHS secretary who also seems all in on all of this. These are things he did not have in 2020. He also seems to have so many more allies in Congress who are willing to do his bidding and say the things he's saying in the lies. I want to play something from Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama that he said on Newsmax on Thursday.
We know President Trump, they put the screws to him. There's no doubt. I've seen the evidence. The same thing we probably have 4 or 5 senators that didn't legally win. They shouldn't be up here.
He's talking about some rumor that popped up this week that the senators from your state, the president was going to say that they were illegitimate. That rumor ended up not being, the reported rumor ended up not bearing out in what we saw on Thursday. But what does it say that all of the levers of power that Republicans have seem to be pointed toward the same thing, which is making people believe that they can't trust our elections, and then more importantly, act on that belief and do things to make shenanigans within the election process?
Eugene, I've been delighted for the last year to spend time in conversation with average Americans. And in fact, I'm just back from DC having a conversation with AFT about what we call the 10 steps to authoritarianism. If you go to the 10stepscampaign.org, we lay it out. But here's what comes to your point. Step 5 in authoritarianism is that you install loyalists, that litany of names that you gave. Those are all people who have no business having the jobs they hold other than their fealty to power. They don't care about the public. They don't care about the republic. They don't care about Americans. They care about being adjacent to power. And let's add to that list the possibility that Jay Clayton, who actually knows better, is the U.S. attorney in New York, sat before Jon Ossoff in front of the U.S. Senate and refused to say plainly that the 2020 elections were fairly decided. They are all in service not of Donald Trump. He may be the person who put them in place, but they're in service of a power structure that does not want to be dismantled either by our midterms in 2026 or by an election in 2028 that can truly upend this competitive authoritarianism. But the other part is what we do about it. What we do about it is make certain that someone like Tommy Tuberville doesn't move from the Senate to becoming the governor of Alabama, because part of his illegitimacy argument is a confession. He doesn't live in Alabama, and he's being challenged for that inadequacy. And so part of our responsibility as American patriots is that we cannot let them steal from us our confidence in our democracy. We can question the mechanisms. We can talk about the fact that the U.S. Postal Service is not doing its job. But that does not mean we do not have a democracy. It means we've got to make that democracy work better. You can look at the machinery and say, get better, without saying that the outcome and the intentions are wrong. My responsibility as someone who believes in democracy, who believes in voting rights, is to question the machinery, but to never, ever, ever say that democracy does not deserve to be defended and that the processes we have should be improved. That's the work we should be doing, and not rehashing 2020 election conspiracies.
Senator Tuberville does say that his primary residence is Alabama, but we know that there is other reporting indicating that it may not be. But, Ms. Abrams, I do want to ask you about some threats being leveled by the Trump administration, by Homeland Security Secretary Mullen in particular. If you could take a listen to what he's threatening against states that he just made on Friday. Take a listen.
If the election officials, once we gave them the information they need to secure their elections, and they chose not to, then those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time.
Some election officials I've talked to, including secretaries of state, kind of laugh off these threats, saying, I'm not going to hand over voter rolls and that the administration can't make them. So do you think that these threats actually have teeth or that they're performative?
I think they absolutely have teeth. I think it is important that our secretaries of state hold their ground, that they not comply with what is a clear violation of the Constitution, which gives to the states the responsibility of maintaining and administering voter rolls. It is not the federal government's job. It is wrong for the federal government to seize this information because they want this information so they can cherry pick the voters who can show up in November. And what the head of DHS is arguing is that in order to have a legitimate election, the federal government gets to pick the electors, and that's just not the way our system works. However, part of competitive authoritarianism is that we weaken our understanding of what our democratic institutions, and I mean small d, not partisan, I'm talking about patriotism. Our responsibility in this moment is to make certain we harden our systems, that our secretaries of state, our county election officials believe that we have their back, that we defend the franchise, that we insist as voters on getting registered, on showing up at the polls, on volunteering, that we do the work of protecting our democratic process. But at the exact same time, we have to take them seriously and literally because they have been willing to murder Americans and immigrants in this country in pursuit of power. And we can never believe that that will not extend to the rest of us because step 9 is the normalization of state violence. And while I do not know what they will do, we cannot discount that they will do something because they are desperate to win.